Hello, everybody. I am excited to have a fellow veteran military spouse on the podcast today. After several various careers while moving as a military spouse, Shari became a national board certified health and life coach, helping women live their life with purpose. So Shari Biery is with me from Alive with Purpose Health and Life Coaching. So Shari, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's so great to see you and spend some time with you, Amy.
Yeah, awesome. So as a veteran military spouse, I'd love if you could just quickly walk us through your journey with like the moves and the jobs and stuff so we kind of know where you've been and what you've done.
That's kind of a funny one. I always say I feel like I was a chameleon through military life as a spouse. My husband and I met in high school, and then he decided I went to respiratory school, became a respiratory therapist. He went to pharmacy school, then he later went to medical school. And at the end of that, it was kind of like, what do we want to do? How do we want to pay medical school? That kind of thing. And he decided to go through the health promotion scholarship. And our idea, we were from a small little town in Ohio, and it was kind of like, yes, we'll see the world kind of thing. It was very exciting, and we had a great time, and then decided just to continue to stay in as that payback was happening. So we kind of thought, in the beginning, it was kind of going to be like, 5 years and we'll be commit, and have our obligation done and then go on. But we realized how much we enjoyed military life in the sense of just the camaraderie and having a community and just seeing the world and how we grew. I started out as a respiratory therapist, and we moved by the end of it all 10 times in 20 years.
It's
And
so,
I
so
felt
many.
it is so many. And it was always a training for my husband and advancing his career. And so I started out as a respiratory therapist. And then when we got stationed in Guam, I knew things were going to change. And I found out really quickly how hard military spouse employment was to be at such a remote location. And at the time, respiratory therapy was done by corpsmen at the hospital. So then we went out, I interviewed explored working in the community hospital, and that just didn't have very good reputation and feeling about it. And so I felt lost kind of in some ways of what was I going to do? We had 2 young kids at the time. And what I found was I jumped into volunteer work at the time. I saw the need was so great. And I just started to really get involved in the military organizations, Navy Marine Corps Relief Society. I became a chairman of volunteers there. I was always volunteering at helping single sailors at the church, doing, community dinners there, helping in my kids' school. And I just found myself, this passion for volunteerism that really grew. And then we moved again to San Diego. We were only there 10 months. So
Oh, you got robbed.
I did. Yes, we did. And then, I thought we were going to be stateside for a while because we had already been to Jacksonville, Hawaii, Groton, Connecticut. We just kind of ping ponged back and forth, Guam, San Diego. And then orders came up, and it was like, I was fully expecting like we were going to be staying in stateside because we had done our 2 years overseas. And we pulled the straw, and it was Okinawa, Japan. And I was a little bitter at first and thinking, why here? I was thinking stateside, I'll get back in my career again. And we went to Okinawa and found the very similar thing. I will say the 3 years there were magical for us. It was tough at times, but we really formed that sense of community. And by this time, we had been to Hawaii, Guam, Okinawa. I had really, built my resume of being a volunteer and really got involved with the communities there too. And we just made our own, I call it the family, when friends become family overseas duty stations and stuff.
Yeah.
It really is an important piece. And it would just, the need was so great there. So it was hard to say no to helping. And then we went back stateside and we got stationed in Annapolis, Maryland. And we were there for 6 years. And I went into the Fleet and Family Service Center. And I thought, okay, maybe I can get back into my career. But at the same time, I had a husband with a really unpredictable schedule. We had no family there. I was like, what kids that were in elementary and middle school? I'm like, they had needs. And I decided when I went in, I was reviewing my resume and doing some classes there, working on my federal resume, and not even really thinking. The career advisor said, have you ever thought about working in the federal government? And I thought, me doing what? And she said, you have so much volunteer work and experience and leadership experience. Think about how those skills can be transitional and into what you could put on a resume. And so that's what I worked on. And I ended up being an administrative assistant at the computer science department at the Naval Academy, worked my way up, ended up as a financial analyst working in the research office. And while that was all fun, it was really not my extreme passion, but it paid the bills. It helped, fill that void of what do I want to do or what can I do to help? And then also that balance of that career. And then we got to move to Pensacola, Florida. My husband and I were both kind of ready to get out of the DC rat race and that go, go, go. And at that time, it was kind of like, the beach was calling us. We had been to so many duty stations with beautiful beaches, and we came to visit and just fell in love with the area. And so he took orders here, and he eventually retired from here. But the time at his retirement, I was really sitting. By that time, I had become a project manager at a local nonprofit, and I was burnt out. I was so tired. I was so exhausted. And he handed me the American flag at his retirement ceremony and said, it's your turn. And so many different things flashed through my mind. One was I had friends who didn't have that experience in, getting the American flag for those reasons. They got them for other reasons. Their service member had died in combat. And I just had the chills come over me of, Shari, this is your life. You get to decide, take advantage. Like, what is it that you want? And that was, it was long discussions. I remember listening to your podcast with your husband about the retirement and the transition and how difficult that is on a couple, on a service spouse, on the service member. There's, I always say there's like 3 different battles going on after transition. And really a 4th one is the family, the kids. Mm-hmm. And I was burnt out at the time. And then I decided to quit my job. It was something I just was never in my thought, but my husband said, it's time to take a break. You need a break. And I realized in that moment, I actually needed to give myself permission. And that's when I just went on this path of self-discovery, fell into coaching, and knew that through my own journey, I found answers. I found, I had a lot of shifting of identity. What was I going to be? Who was I? All the things that come up when you are in transition. We were going through that, not only individually, but as a couple too. So that's really how I ended up becoming a national board certified health and wellness coach, was really through my own journey of seeing how stress, my lifestyle, was really killing me from the inside out. And I knew I had to make some different choices and changes. And the biggest thing was giving myself permission to say yes to myself.
Yeah, that is an amazing story. I love the end result of it all, but I don't want to like disregard the struggles and how hard you worked during that whole time. I thought you guys are Air Force, right?
No, we're Navy.
Oh, for some reason I thought you were Air Force because as you're telling me these duty stations, I'm like, I think they're Navy, but I remember Air Force for some reason. Okay, yeah, no,
Yeah,
that makes
we had a
more
lot of
sense
Air
now.
Force friends. So, and that was the great thing about moving to all these, duty stations where there were a lot of joint commands and different things. And so, yeah, I mean, we have a lot of Air Force friends too. A lot of Army friends, a lot of Coast Guard. It's really, I think that's what I love so much about the military is just this blending of so many people from so many different backgrounds and being able to learn that, how different service spouses and their families kind of adapt to the different demands that they have in the Marine Corps, all of that. So it's a little different for everybody.
It really is. And I think you make a good point of, there's so many people from so many different backgrounds coming together. And I just think it opens your eyes to what's out there in the world and how different people can be, but how at like the base level core, like we are all the same, no matter where we come from. Like we all want to be included. We all want to be loved. We all want like, to spend time with our family and friends and we're all the same, even though we come from all over the place. And I love on your website, you talked about having a curvy career path. And I think that's such a cute way to like explain this role of like following your spouse around, whether it be for the military or just regular job changes or things, because it is so hard to maintain your career, especially when it comes to like certifications or like state requirements or whatever. And so I think that's just a great way to kind of like shift your mindset a bit of being like, it's not hard, it's just curvy and you have to kind of go with the flow and bend. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really, I think that's what's, if you take this, I think you have to have a special mindset being a military spouse anyway. First of all, that's just, it takes a whole lot more than probably what you're giving yourself credit for as a
Yeah.
spouse and what other people are giving you credit for, especially who are not in the military and don't understand that. But it is one of those things that I think we have such a beautiful fire inside us that is one of those, like, we see like the best we can if we really shift our mindset of seeing what is the best opportunity for me in this situation and make the best out of that. What may seem doom and gloom to most, we can really turn it to make it look like, what can I pull from this opportunity that can help others, but also really help highlight some of my skills and my values.
Yeah. That's a great mindset to have. Can you talk a little bit more about like if somebody has never volunteered for anything in their life, like I'll be very honest, I'm not a big volunteer. Like that's not my thing, but I would love to. I just like, how do you get started? Like, I think it's overwhelming for me to be like, I need to find a cause or a group or an organization that like really speaks to me. And I feel like it's like, I just haven't found that yet. Or like, I haven't had this like massive moment of like, oh, this is the thing that I'm going to volunteer. So how does somebody like get started, find a thing to like get involved with if maybe that's not really their thing or they're not used to doing it?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, especially transitions, working with clients who are facing that transition, either their kids are leaving, things have changed kind of thing, or, you find you have some time retiring. I always kind of really love the mindset of not what you're retiring from, but what you're retiring to.
Oh, I love
So
that.
if you have that space in your life of like, what is the time? Now I have free time. What do I want to do with that? I think it really comes down to, what do you love to do? What are your passions that you really enjoy? And if you don't know that, this is where, just like me in that very beginning of my stages of exhaustion and burnout, I needed clarity. I needed clarity of what I wanted, what my values were. What really lined up for me was finding what it was that I wanted to do. And I didn't have all the answers for it. Some of that was just exploring to say, what is out there? Do I like art? Do I like to paint? Do I like to read? Do I like to go out and be in nature? And then from there, it's like, what do you like to do? I have a client right now, actually a gentleman who retired, and he's like so lost because all his passion and his purpose was all wrapped up in his job. And now he's transitioned and he's so, he's just in that circle of, I don't know what to do. We had a great discussion. And one of those was like, he built his own house.
Oh,
He
wow.
is so handy. He's so handy and he's not giving himself credit. And I said, do you enjoy that? Yes, I enjoy it. So we started just brainstorming about like, what are some of the nonprofits out there that really, let's just list them right now. It doesn't mean you're going to go, jump right in. It's just, this is exploration. And I think that's what's so beautiful about coaching is curiosity. We're not saying we have to do it just yet. We're just exploring. So looking at those one thing is looking at what are your passions? What are the things that excite you? You want something that's going to help you jump out of bed. Like you're jumping out of bed to do it in the morning. You want to be excited about it. You don't want, that is really number 2, I would say, is go with your gut. There is a reason we call it gut instinct, is because you get that intuitive hit, like, I really enjoy this, or yeah, this isn't for me kind of thing. And being able to just try things out without fully committing. Many, organizations they have one-time things where you can come out and just kind of look at the different things. So I think it's just exploring is the biggest thing, is, Google searching nonprofits in your area or volunteering. It could be anything from beach cleanups once a month with an organization that we have here. There's all kinds of things. And volunteerism is one of those things that it's so needed. There's so many ways. And I think that's really how you find your meaning in your life, is being able, when you can give of your time and your talents of what seems so easy to you. Maybe somebody out there they're wishing for a person like you to walk through the door, to just give them 5 hours a week or 2 hours a week or whatever your time is. So being able to just go with curiosity with that, I think is good. And then you can step into what kind of time commitment and all of that. I think fear and this whole, like, we've got to be totally committed to this organization kind of comes in, and we all step back and say, I don't want to give that much time. But that's really, you can come into a community and then just step in and find out what's comfortable. And you can always back off and say no, even though it's a very difficult thing. It's a learned habit, I will say.
Yeah. I feel like you have just given us all permission to just explore and not commit, which I feel like I needed. And then also to, only do what time commitment you're able to and back off if you need to. It's not like it has always just overwhelmed me of like, I have to do everything all at once, like 100% all in. And it's like, oh, it doesn't have to be that way. So thank you for that permission. That's good.
Yes. Yeah. It's such good mindset to really check yourself in. As I was chairman of Volunteers for Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, I worked with the Girl Scout organization and was their overseas committee chairman. I've been president of the Spouses Club. What I always tried to do is see the strength in people who said, how can I help?
Yeah.
And I would have a conversation with them is, what do you like to do? And being able to pull that out, because if you don't like finances, I don't want you to be the bookkeeper for the organization. It's one of those things. And I really, honestly, I navigated my careers through that, the different things I did. One of the things I was a financial analyst at the Naval Academy. And I was like, after I did it, parts of the job I enjoyed, there were different organization things, but I realized real quickly, I did not want to do that the rest of my life. Spreadsheets, No, thank you.
Yeah.
Excel, I can muddle through, but no, thank you. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good that you can kind of like figure out what it is that you really like to do by volunteering and, saying yes to some things and being like, actually, that's not my thing. So let me do something else. That's really good. Um, I know we kind of backtracking a little bit, talking about your husband's military retirement. I love that he kind of like said, it's your turn. You have permission now. And I think a lot of times what you talked about, we have this like shifting identity, or we just feel kind of like the add-on of like we have to follow them around and do all their stuff. And then now we have time for us. And it's like, what do we do? Which I know you help with coaching and finding your purpose and figuring out how to do all of that. But the other thing that you mentioned about the retirement ceremony, which I'd love to talk about a little bit, is kind of like how it is a close to a chapter before you can move on to the next. I know we've talked about like when my husband and I were talking on the podcast about his retirement ceremony, and he didn't want to have one. And I was like, I think you do. And that was kind of my big thing, is like, we need to kind of like close this before we move on. So I think that's a great perspective to have. But were you ever like concerned about like, how do you live your life after that? Like without the military essentially kind of telling you what to do? Like, yeah, it's great to have this closure, but was like the next step, was that hard for you guys?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think transition, I think that's the one thing we weren't prepared for, was the emotional part
Mm,
of retirement, of that transition of what does this mean for us now? Like he said, somebody always he knew the uniform he had to wear. He knew his job. Anytime, it changed, there was always someone, either most of the time, passing over the reins and stuff. And you all figure that out along the way. And then you go out into the civilian world, and it's difficult sometimes to find this organizations that have the same values as you have. It's really, I think the reason we have so much transition, especially with veterans after military service, is we have to take the time to find what are those companies that line up with my values. Like, can I really go in and feel all in for this? And it's a different mindset too of, having this where you're 24/7 in the military. And we had to have some pretty strong conversations about boundaries of
yeah.
work time and home time, of like, you're not getting paid for that, to answer an email at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. at night. Like, that mindset has to shift a little bit. And, coming back together as a couple too, it's being able to listen to one another. I think that was one of the biggest things. And I was so appreciative at the time I had stepped into coaching and just kind of going through it a little bit. I was just starting and going through my training, and just this awareness piece of being active listening is being able to ask the questions of, what do you want? And stepping back, and rather than putting our own agendas on each other, we were able to open that space and talk. And for so many veteran military spouses and the transitioning service member, veteran military spouses that I talk to, they're like, we almost didn't make it,
Hmm.
or didn't make it. I have friends going through divorces, different things. We've changed so much. He was gone all the time. Now he's home. There's just so many things to kind of face as you step into that transition. And there's definitely, I think the identity thing is a big piece in all of it. Where are you as a military spouse in your identity? Where are you as an active duty service member coming out of active service into transition? And then where are you as a couple and as a family? Because there's a lot of different influences. So yeah.
It's definitely hard, but it's possible. And then there are people like you that can help walk you through it if you're having issues. I'm so thankful that my husband's last command it was just so much more relaxed, and he was able to kind of like slowly off ramp, because I think it would have been so much harder. Like most, I think, military members and their families, it's like you're go, go, go 100% on Friday, and then Monday you're done. Like you don't go back. And I think that like super opposite kind of schedule and lifestyle is really hard. And I'm really grateful that we had like practice with it for a few years before he was like, oh, I'm done now. So
Yeah.
generally, I feel like our transition has been fairly easy in a lot of those ways because we had that kind of like off ramp, which I really appreciate. Okay, let's get a little bit into like your coaching and all the wisdom we could get from you. So I know you work with clients virtually and you're building friendships and connections with your clients. I think because of COVID, people working from home, like all these things, like we're all so much more virtual than we used to be. Thankfully, we don't have to be, but we are virtual a lot. And so, like, what have you found that like helps you to connect whenever it is virtual, or like to build a deeper connection with somebody than just, having a quick Zoom call and, whether it be a coworker or a client or something like that, to where you can actually feel like maybe you're friends and not just colleagues or acquaintances?
Yeah. Yeah. I think conversation is where it starts. And, yes, we had to shift our whole mindset around, being on Zoom versus being in person. But what I have really found is people are lonely. People are feeling alone. And it really, whether it's virtually or whether it's in person, we can have a very deep conversation pretty quickly in a coaching session. And it's all about feeling comfortable and feeling trustful in what you're sharing too. And knowing that, coaching is confidential when we're in that, I like to call it, we're in our cocoon.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's like, we start talking about what is the vision, what is the vision for you? And if you don't know that, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with taking the steps to figure it out. And that's what coaching is so powerful with, is taking those steps. And then what's stopping you? What's stopping you from taking a step or having you feel so stuck in where you're at? And then building a plan. Sometimes it's having that accountability and support walking beside you each week, and with my coaching clients, I build the rapport very quickly on our first call. But then also I use an app called Voxer, which is like a talk to text app. And so we're talking Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So it is very short, sweet, but it's accountability, it's support, it's very quickly we can get to a trusted relationship. And it doesn't matter whether you're coaching with me or with it's something to look at for anybody that you're hiring, either as a coach or a therapist. Therapy is really working on those wounds and those things in our past that are really got us keeping stuck there, laying back, really looking back. And coaching is all about looking forward. We identify and acknowledge those things, but we look at, how can we look at that from a strength point? Like what, because of that experience, has made you the person you are today, and celebrating those strengths. And then from there, looking forward to say, what is it that you want? What's slowing you down? A lot of things, but the trust thing, and really that, there's a camaraderie again of feeling, and then building community. I have a Finding the Calm in the Chaos Facebook community. I do group coaching. So women come on their group coaching calls, and it gets pretty deep fast, in the sense of like, we know when we feel like we're all alone, we feel like we're the only ones. But when we can come into an environment like a coaching space and hear somebody say, oh my gosh, this is what happened to me, or this is what's going on, and someone else go, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one struggling with this. It's very quick to form those bonds. So I have a lot of women in my coaching groups that are like, they've never met in person. Some of them I've just met recently myself in person. And it's like a friendship that we never really felt like was something that we had to work at. It just was something that happened naturally, and just is so beautiful to not feel alone and feel supported.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think some things that you talked about that can really help in those situations when you talked about Voxer and just that like hearing someone's voice is so much, it just connects you in such a deeper way, I think, than just texting, which is great and it has its time and place. But like being able to hear the tone and the inflection and all that stuff really can connect you a lot more. And I liked hearing your distinction between therapy and coaching because that's something that I hadn't really thought of before, but it totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as women, I think we just do a much better job in general of like deeply connecting a lot faster than guys do. I
Yeah.
saw an interview with Jane Fonda actually recently where she was talking about how groups of men that are friends sit like in a line and look out. And so they're not like connecting with each other a whole lot. They're watching sports or they're whatever they're doing. And women sit like in a circle or inward and look at each other. And I think that's just it is an interesting visual of like how women I feel like tend to do a better job of connecting in that way. So
Yeah, absolutely. We're wired that way.
yeah.
And it's such a beautiful thing. Like that's the thing. We want community. Everybody wants community and connection in some way. And some people want it a little bit differently than others. And that's okay. How, find the way that fits for you is really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to make sure that we put links to your website, your coaching, all that stuff in the show notes so people can check it out. I did want to mention though, you do have like a 5-minute stress reliever, which I think like everybody's got 5 minutes and we probably all could use a little bit of stress relief. So I'll be sure to put links to it and we can check it out. Do you have like one quick thing that would like take some stress off?
Yeah, I think, one thing that happened with me at the retirement ceremony that I really noticed I hadn't done in 20 years was exhale.
Yeah.
I was holding my breath. We hold our breaths. Just take curiosity today and just notice how much you are holding in when you're walking around. It's kind of ties into the stress release that you mentioned that I have. But it is one of those things, is like just connecting to your breath, closing your eyes and connecting to your senses, not only your breath, but being able to, like, what do you see? What can you feel? What can you touch? Is just getting back in the present moment. So many times we're working so hard in the future. And yes, there is some time for that, but it's really coming back to connecting to ourselves and our body, and overall health will be so much better if we can get our bodies to get out of this fight or flight that everybody is in our world, and just coming back to that. So hopefully that will help. Big deep breath in and exhale.
Literally, as you said it, I'm like, I'm holding my breath right now. That's funny. Okay, perfect. I think that was a good spot to end, and we're just going to roll right into our last call questions. So the first one is, what is the best party that you've ever hosted?
Ooh, best party. Oh my gosh. I think definitely, if I had to pick, it would be Okinawa. And the reason being is, MWR, we rented a couple of tents. This was Thanksgiving. And I think one Thanksgiving I cooked, between all the volunteer stuff I did, I think I cooked 12 turkeys. And I just had the oven going all week. But it wasn't all for that one party, but it was for some volunteer stuff too. But we hosted a neighborhood party at our house. We rented a couple of tents with some neighbors, and we just, opened our door and had the whole buffet table set up. And we invited, single sailors from my husband's command, and invited people and friends, not just from the neighborhood, but friends that we knew. We're all by ourselves as families. So that was just such a fun way to connect and really kind of help that homesick feeling or loneliness,
Yeah.
or, be able to get through some of that. I think that's the one thing we have to remember. If you're feeling that way, somebody else is too. And sometimes it just takes the invitation to say, what do you think about doing this? And partnering up with somebody. I was able to partner up with a couple other spouses in the neighborhood, and they were like, I can bring this and that. So it was more like a potluck than anything. But I think that's really was probably one of our favorite things. And we did them, at other duty stations too, and was so much fun. But that one stands out.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned earlier of like anytime you're overseas, it's just you're so far away. Like you're not gonna go to your parents' house or your grandparents' house or like it's just not feasible. And so you really do build a family with the people around you. And I always call it like shared trauma. It doesn't have to be traumatic, but like that trauma
Yeah.
bond of being overseas and not having family and getting together does create those like super intense memories that and those feelings of like inclusivity and just like connection that you're like trying to find everywhere else you go. But I think it's that whole thing about being overseas that it just like it really bonds you together. And I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's difficult while you're there, but that connection is great. And you won't find it anywhere else, I feel like. And
Yeah.
unless you do
And
that.
I
So
love what you said. I love what you said there, Amy, because it is one of those things we can look at it as this is awful, this is horrible, this is going to be. And if we look at it that way, it's going to be, right?
yeah.
But if we look at it and especially reflecting back on it now, I'm like, those were some of the best times in our lives of being able to kind of be in this little shelter of the world that we were in, having our friends and our kids, being able to play on the street and not worry about the things that are, all consumed with us now in our world. And, there's such a special thing, like you said, with overseas duty stations that, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, it's like, what are the good things that came out of that?
Yeah. And there's so many good things. I think it's just so hard to replicate those situations or feelings whenever you are back stateside because people have their families or people go off and do their own stuff. You kind of get into your typical schedule of life and things, and you're not all doing the same thing and in the same place and isolated all together. And it's just, I am having a hard time at this point in my life trying to replicate those feelings and that connection with people here where we live because it's like everybody's got their family and I'm like I'm not used to this, like this is a whole new thing for me. This is like nobody wants to come over on Easter because they're with their family. That's a strange concept to me.
Yeah, I think, when we can take this just a little bit deeper, is like looking for, is there someone who you just want to have coffee with? A really quick story is I had volunteered. Actually, I went to a church camp with my daughter one year. And as a volunteer, I didn't know a whole lot of people, but I was willing to be that parent that helped. And I ended up meeting another gal there who, after we got back, she said, I'd love to have coffee with you sometime. And we're both Catholic. So we were like, you want to go to mass? And then we ended up at morning mass one morning. We ended up having coffee afterwards. And she said, I really enjoyed this. I'd love to do this again. So we ended up doing it again. And pretty soon, then she was like, my sister would really enjoy this. And then I was like, oh, I have a couple of friends I know. This is now, we call this our Jesus and Java group that meets Friday mornings every so often. We don't meet every Friday, but we were consistent before the pandemic. But the whole thing was, I get a text once in a while, every couple of Fridays, it's Thursdays. It's like, hey, anybody up for J&J tomorrow? It's those little things you have no idea. It's like starting there and it's the pebble that like ripples out and it becomes bigger. So finding just that one person can make all the difference with it. So yeah.
You are the second person 2 weeks in a row that has essentially said the same thing to me. Like it all just starts with one person. And it's like, I'm like, that's the mindset that I really need to get in. And I think we all could get in of, you don't have to find 20 new friends. It's like, you just have to find one person. I love that. The next question I was going to ask you is like, what's the best community that you've been a part of? And that's what you had said. So I love the Jesus and Java. That's just so fun. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. The last call question here. What is your best party hosting tip?
I think the best party hosting tip is get a sidekick or you get a team member, co-chair together, because it's one of those things I think you can take all of it on yourself and then it becomes, oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind. And I have always found that whenever I've shared an idea or said, somebody's usually come up and said, "Hey, would you like some help?" And I think as women, sometimes we think we don't want the help or we can't take the help or that would make us look weak or
Yeah.
whatever it is. You just need to let that stuff go and be like, yeah, sure. How can we make this fun and getting into it? So I think the best party tip is do it with someone else, like have a co-chair or someone who can be your co-partner in crime of doing it and being able to make it fun, because you pull each other's strengths. I admit I am not the decorator. Like, I can cook and I can do that part and I enjoy doing that, but I can pull out some ideas. But I have several friends that are like, oh my gosh, you walk in and it looks like the whole room has been transformed. And I'm like, okay, you're in charge of decorations, kind of thing. And that's usually like going back to what is your strengths? Like, what do you love to do and finding that passion? So definitely, and delegate, like, don't be afraid to delegate. That is probably, if I could give a bonus tip, that would be it.
That's awesome. Those are all so good. And if you're doing it with somebody, you're probably having way more fun than if you're doing it by yourself. So
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Shari, this has been so fun. I feel like you've given us permission to not commit 100% to volunteering, even if it's something we want to do, which I appreciate. You've given us permission to like explore what we like and ways to exhale and take a breath and be a little less stressed. So that's awesome. I really appreciate you being here. And like I said, the show notes will have links to where people can find you more and, work with you if they feel like they need some help and some coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Amy. This has been such a fun conversation.
You're welcome.